A scholarship boy from a rental apartment claiming his daddy's a four-star general at the Pentagon. Mrs. Harriet Colton let the words hang in the air of the music theory classroom like smoke. Her ring scraped slowly along the edge of the music stand, once, twice, the sound sharp and deliberate as a warning bell. That is the most creative fiction I have heard in 22 years of teaching. The laughter started at the front row and moved backward through the room like a wave. Marcus Webb did not move. He stood at the center of the classroom, his second-hand score sheet still in his hands, the fluorescent light above him flickering in its usual indifferent rhythm. His jaw was set. His breathing was slow. Only his fingers betrayed him. Pressing into the paper hard enough to leave impressions. He was 17 years old. He was alone in a room full of people laughing at the idea of his father. But General Raymond Webb was already coming. And before this was over, Harrington Conservatory of the Arts would spend a very long time wishing it had never touched his son. The room smelled of old sheet music and wood polish, the particular scent of a building that confused expense with excellence. Portraits of wealthy alumni donors lined the marble hallway outside, men in dark suits, women in pearls, all staring down at the same angle, the angle of people who had never once looked up. Inside Classroom 7, 31 students watched Marcus Webb stand in the fluorescent light and absorb what Mrs. Colton was doing to him. Most of them said nothing. Donovan Ashworth, seated in the front row beside his imported leather satchel and his expression of practiced amusement, said nothing either. He did not need to. He simply turned to the student beside him and smiled, small, private, satisfied, the smile of someone watching a plan work exactly as designed. "The composition you submitted," Colton continued, her voice dropping into the register she used for final verdicts, "is not yours. The provenance is fraudulent, and frankly, Marcus," she paused, letting his first name fall like a diminishment, "the mythology you've constructed around yourself ends here. Every note in that piece is mine." Marcus's voice was quiet, completely steady. The room went still. No one spoke to Mrs. Colton like that, not in 22 years. Her ring stopped moving against the music stand. Marcus said again. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes something irreversible. Colton crossed the room in 4 steps, reached past Marcus without a word, and lifted his handwritten score from the desk. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she dropped it into the waste bin beside the door. The paper made almost no sound going in. That was somehow the worst part. Before we continue, subscribe right now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story is only getting started. But to understand what happened inside that classroom, we need to go back to where it all began. 6 months earlier. The fun is just beginning. Tell us what city you're from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. The tension is rising. Who's watching from where? Like and subscribe to the channel. More to come. Tell us in the comments who's from which country, and give us a like and subscribe. The plot thickens. Let's check our geography. Tell us where you are now. Give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. We're just warming up. Tell us where you're watching from. Give the video a like and hit the subscribe button. The climax is near. Share where you're from, like, and be sure to subscribe. Events are unfolding rapidly. Write your city in the chat, give it a like, and subscribe so you don't get lost. The juiciest part is yet to come. Let's get started. Get to know each other. Where are you from? Like and subscribe right now. The suspense is building. Tell us where you're watching this episode from, and reward us with a like and a subscribe. The excitement is running high. Tell us what city you're from now. Give us a big like and subscribe to the channel. 5:45 in the morning. The alarm on Marcus Webb's cracked screen phone buzzed against the nightstand of a studio apartment on Clement Street, 3 bus stops from Harrington Conservatory. The room was small enough that he could touch 2 walls simultaneously if he stretched his arms. He did not mind. He had learned to work inside constraints. He was up before the second buzz. The apartment smelled of instant coffee and the faint dampness of a building that was older than anyone admitted. Marcus moved through his morning routine with the economy of someone raised by a soldier. Bed made with hospital corners, dishes from the night before already dry in the rack, composition notebook open on the small table beside a chipped ceramic mug. He wrote every morning before school, always by hand, always in pencil. The notebook was 3/4 full. The current piece had no title yet, only a dedication written in careful block letters at the top of the page. For Captain E. Webb, so you can still hear it. His mother had been gone 4 years. The music was how he kept talking to her. Marcus arrived at Harrington's service entrance at 6:48, the way scholarship students did, through the side door, not the marble front steps. The hallway smelled of floor wax and old wood, and the fluorescent lights hummed their usual indifferent note. His instrument case had a broken latch he'd fixed with a strip of electrical tape. He carried it the way some kids carried trophies. ___, quote, _9__, the voice came from the end of the corridor. Mr. Theodore Okafor was pushing a mop bucket across the dark tile, his gray coveralls soft with washing, a small American flag pin on the left breast pocket catching the hall light. ___, quote, _10__, Marcus said. Okafor stopped the bucket and looked at him with the particular expression of a man who had learned to read people before trusting them. He had been custodian at Harrington for 11 years. In that time, he had watched many talented children enter through the service entrance and leave through the front. He had watched others simply disappear. Marcus smiled. Small, brief, the kind of smile that didn't ask for anything in return. "I'll eat at lunch." Okafor watched him continue down the hall toward practice room 14, the instrument case swinging gently at his side, his worn gray sneakers silent on the waxed floor. Then the old man shook his head slowly and went back to his mop. Practice room 14 smelled of Rosin and decades of other people's effort. Marcus set down his case, opened his notebook to the latest page, and began to play, quietly, carefully, building the piece the way someone builds a letter they are not sure will ever arrive. Through the small window above the door, Harrington Conservatory woke up around him, the marble hallways filled with voices, expensive coats, the sharp cologne of people who had never once doubted their place. Marcus kept playing. He did not yet know that someone had already decided his time here was ending. The composition was due on a Friday. Marcus had been working on it for 11 weeks. He called it Nothing Out Loud. In his notebook, under the dedication to his mother, he had written one working title in small letters and then crossed it out twice. Constant. It was a piece about what remains when everything else is taken. 47 bars, handwritten on manuscript paper he had purchased with birthday money from his father, the pages slightly warped from the humidity of his apartment. He submitted it on Thursday morning, 1 day early. He slid it through the slot in Mrs. Colton's classroom door and walked away without waiting. He did not see Donovan Ashworth standing at the far end of the hallway, watching. Donovan Ashworth was 16 and looked older in the way that money sometimes manufactures. Tailored blazer, clean haircut, a leather satchel that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. He smelled of cedarwood cologne and the particular confidence of someone who had never once been told the answer was no. His own composition, submitted the previous afternoon, had taken him 3 weeks and the quiet assistance of a private tutor his father had flown in from Boston. That evening, in the corridor outside the faculty offices, Marcus heard them. He had stayed late. He was returning a stand to the storage room when Mrs. Colton's voice came through the partially open door of her office, low and precise as a metronome. "It's exceptional work, she said. "I know." Donovan's voice, flat, almost bored, quote 17 she paused, quote 18, quote 19. A silence followed. Marcus stood very still in the hallway. The fluorescent light above him buzzed. He pressed his back against the cold painted wall and listened to what happened next. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 20, underscore, underscore Colton said, the way she said his name, without warmth, without weight, the way one says the name of something inconvenient. Donovan's voice did not change. That's what my father pays the endowment for, isn't it? Another silence. Longer this time. There are proper channels, Colton said, but she did not say no. Marcus walked away before he heard anything else. His sneakers were silent on the waxed floor, and the hallway stretched ahead of him like something that had already been decided. He told himself he had misunderstood. He told himself there were explanations. He was still telling himself this 2 days later when he arrived at class and Colton placed Donovan's composition on the projector and described it, in front of 31 students, as the finest student work she had encountered in a decade. The harmonic language, she said, was mature. Marcus looked at the projected score. His chest tightened like a fist closing slowly around something fragile. 4 bars in, there was a modulation, a specific, unusual move from D minor to B flat major through an interrupted cadence that he had invented alone at 5:45 in the morning in his small, damp apartment. He had never shown it to anyone. He had never shown it to anyone except the slot in Mrs. Colton's door. News in a school like Harrington travels faster than rumor and lands harder than fact. By Monday morning, the story had already been shaped, packaged, and distributed through every hallway and group thread in the building. Marcus Webb had plagiarized Donovan Ashworth's composition. He had copied it from a piece Donovan had been developing all semester. The scholarship student had stolen from the benefactor's son. No one asked Marcus if it was true. That same Monday, Donovan found Kira between classes near the instrument lockers on the second floor. Kira was a third-year student, good family, moderate talent, a desperate need to remain in Donovan's orbit. She smelled of vanilla body spray and anxiety, and she held her folder against her chest like a shield she knew was insufficient. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 27, underscore, underscore, Donovan said. He was not looking at her. He was examining his own fingernails. Quote, 28, quote, 29. He reached into his satchel and produced a folded document, a printed score. Marcus's name overwritten in careful ink with Donovan's own handwriting. Kira stared at it. His voice was easy, almost bored. He finally looked at her. Kira took the document. It was warm from being inside his bag, almost uncomfortably so, and her fingers left small damp impressions on the edge of the paper. She held it the way someone holds something they already regret. She found Marcus's instrument case in the rehearsal hall at noon while he was at lunch. The broken latch opened without resistance. She slid the document into the front pocket, her hands moving quickly, her eyes on the door. The paper disappeared into the case like it had always lived there. She walked out without looking back. She did not look back because she knew if she did, she would not be able to keep moving. That afternoon, Mrs. Colton announced a spot inspection of student materials. A routine check, she called it, to ensure proper cataloging of submitted works. She moved through the rehearsal hall with a clipboard and her usual precision, her ring tapping against it in slow, even intervals. She reached Marcus's case last. She did not rummage. She did not search. She went directly to the front pocket with the broken latch, unclipped it, and reached inside. The document came out slowly. She held it up under the rehearsal hall's overhead lights, and the printed score caught the glare and shone. "Well," she said. Her voice was quiet, satisfied, the tone of someone arriving at a destination they had planned for some time. "I think we've found our answer." Marcus looked at the paper in her hand. He had never seen it before in his life. The room was very still. 31 students. Not one of them spoke. Principal Howard Finch called Marcus into his office the following morning. The office smelled of leather polish and stale air, and the framed portrait of Senator Richard Ashworth, Harrington's primary benefactor, donor of the new performance wing, hung directly behind Finch's desk at eye level, positioned like a second authority in the room. Finch was a small man who had learned to make himself smaller in the presence of larger money. He folded his hands on the desk and did not quite meet Marcus's eyes. Quote, 39, quote, he said, quote, 40, quote, 41, quote, 42, quote, 43, quote. Finch's hands tightened slightly against each other. The committee has reviewed Mrs. Colton's assessment. Given the circumstances, he glanced briefly, almost involuntarily, at the portrait behind him. The recommendation is a formal academic hearing. Pending that outcome, your scholarship status is under review. Marcus looked at the portrait, then back at Finch. You already know I didn't do this, Marcus said quietly. Finch said nothing, which was its own answer. That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment with his cracked phone on the table in front of him for 40 minutes before he picked it up. Outside, rain moved against the single window in slow diagonal lines. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closer. He had his mother's photo in his hand, her in uniform, smiling at something outside the frame, her captain's insignia catching whatever light the photographer had used. He dialed. It rang twice. Marcus! His father's voice was low and steady, carrying the particular quality of a man who had learned to remain calm in proportion to the severity of what he was hearing. Quote, 48. A pause. Quote, 49. Silence on the line. Not empty silence. Weighted silence, the kind that precedes a decision. Quote, 50, General Raymond Webb said. Quote, 51, Marcus told him. All of it. The hallway conversation he had overheard, the inspection, the document he had never written, Finch's office, the portrait on the wall. He spoke without emotion, the way his father had taught him, facts first, feelings after, always in that order. When he finished, the line was quiet for 3 full seconds. Are you safe? Yes. Are you still going to class? Yes. Good. Another pause. Marcus, look at your mother's photo. Marcus looked at it. She used to say the truth doesn't need defending. It needs witnesses. His father's voice was even. Absolute. Quote, 59. Quote, 60. Quote, 61. The call ended. Marcus set the phone down on the table beside the photo. The rain continued against the window. He sat very still for a long moment, and then he opened his composition notebook and picked up his pencil. He did not write music. He wrote dates. Every date he remembered, every detail, every name. At the Pentagon, 400 miles away, General Raymond Webb was already making a different kind of call. The Pentagon operations room smelled of recycled air and burnt coffee, the fluorescent panels overhead casting everything in the same flat, colorless light that made 3 in the morning indistinguishable from 3 in the afternoon. Lieutenant Commander Priya Anand preferred it that way. Time was a distraction, data was not. She had been at her station for 6 hours when Captain Daniel Reyes set a second coffee on the desk beside her keyboard without being asked. Quote, 62, she said, not looking up. Quote, 63, quote, 64, quote, 65. She clicked twice. Quote, 66. Reyes leaned forward. The monitor's blue light caught the angles of his face. The principal. Labeled it himself. Annan turned the screen slightly so he could read the file name. It said, insurance_HA_RC.ENC. Encrypted. Stored on a personal external drive registered to his school account. He's been holding it for 8 months. Against Ashworth? That would be my read. She began the decryption sequence, her fingers moving quickly across the keys. People in Finch's position don't keep insurance unless they expect to need it. The file opened at 4:17 in the morning. The footage was timestamp coded, shot from the hallway camera outside the instrument storage room. The resolution was institutional, flat, slightly greenish, the kind of image that captures fact without atmosphere. At 11:47 p.m., Mrs. Harriet Colton appeared in the frame. She was alone. She used a faculty key to unlock the storage room door, entered, and remained inside for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When she emerged, her hands were empty. "She set the stage," Reyes said quietly. "Keep watching," Annan said. At 11:53, the camera angle caught the window of classroom 7 across the interior courtyard, and in the reflection of that window, a face. Colton, standing just inside the darkened classroom, watching the rehearsal hall below, watching Marcus Webb, who was still in the building, unaware, collecting his instrument case after a late practice session, watching and smiling. Not a large smile, not theatrical, small and private and satisfied, the smile of someone who had been patient for a long time and was finally watching something fall into place. Annan paused the footage on that frame. The room was silent except for the hum of the servers. General Raymond Webb had not spoken during the playback. He stood behind Annan's chair with his arms at his sides and his jaw set in the particular stillness of a man processing something that required processing carefully before it became action. He had spent 31 years in uniform. He had witnessed institutional cruelty in forms that most people never encountered and could not imagine. This was different. The mundane smallness of it. A teacher in a darkened classroom smiling at a 17-year-old boy's destruction in a building that smelled of wood polish and called itself a place of excellence. "General," Annan's voice was careful, quote 76 __. Webb looked at the frozen image on the screen for another 3 seconds. Quote 77, he said, quote 78. The City Hall auditorium held 412 people. By 7:45 in the morning, every seat was filled, and the standing room along the back wall was 3 bodies deep. The air smelled of coffee from paper cups and the particular tension of people who had chosen a side before they arrived. Harrington families occupied the left, pressed blazers, private school scarves. Senator Richard Ashworth's political base arranged behind him like a wall of expensive endorsements. On the right, veterans in modest jackets with service pins, minority families from the neighborhood surrounding the conservatory, students Marcus had never met who had heard and come anyway. Mr. Theodore Okafor sat in the 3rd row in his Sunday clothes, his American flag pin on his left breast, his hands folded in his lap. The overhead lights were too bright and the air conditioning had failed. The room was a powder keg wearing formal attire. Senator Ashworth spoke first. He was a tall man with silver hair and a voice calibrated for large rooms, and he used both to their full advantage. "This proceeding," he said, adjusting his cufflinks with a small practiced motion, "has been orchestrated by a 4-star general who has confused military authority with civilian jurisdiction. A beloved educator of 22 years is being dragged before a public tribunal because a student was caught with evidence of misconduct. And his father has the connections to reframe that misconduct as conspiracy." Murmurs from the left side. Agreement. Nodding. "Mrs. Colton has dedicated her life to this institution. My family has invested in this institution." He paused for effect. "What is happening today is not justice. It is intimidation wearing a uniform." Applause from the left, scattered, confident. General Raymond Webb sat in the front row and did not move. He was in full dress uniform, 4 stars on each shoulder, every decoration in its correct position. And he sat with the stillness of a man who had learned that presence alone, correctly deployed, was its own argument. He did not look at Ashworth. He looked at his son. Marcus sat beside him, his worn composition notebook on his knee, his gray sneakers flat on the auditorium floor. "Marcus." General Webb's voice was barely above a whisper. He did not look away from the front of the room. Marcus looked down at the notebook. On the inside cover, in his own handwriting, copied from memory years ago, The note that holds is the one played with conviction, not volume. He nodded once. The board chair called for the student's testimony. Senator Ashworth leaned toward his attorney and said something quiet, and the attorney smiled. General Webb stood. He did not speak. He simply turned to his son and placed one hand briefly on his shoulder, a touch so brief it was almost nothing, and somehow everything, then stepped aside. Marcus stood. He walked to the microphone. The room settled into the specific silence of people, deciding whether to listen or simply wait to react. He opened his notebook to the first dated entry, November 4th, 11 weeks ago. "I'd like to begin," he said quietly, "at the beginning. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens next will change everything." Marcus read from the notebook for 11 minutes without interruption. He read dates, times, musical decisions. The specific morning he discovered the interrupted cadence that moved from D minor to B flat major. The afternoon he crossed out 16 bars and rebuilt them from silence. The night he wrote the dedication to his mother and then sat for a long time without writing anything else. His voice was quiet and even, not performance, not argument, just the plain architecture of truth, laid out like sheet music on a stand. The room listened in a way it had not listened to Senator Ashworth. When he finished, he closed the notebook. The auditorium was very still. Mrs. Harriet Colton sat at the respondent's table in a charcoal blazer, her hands folded, her conductor's ring catching the overhead light. She had not moved during his testimony. She was watching him with an expression that gave away nothing, professional, composed, the face of a woman who had worn authority so long it had become her actual features, but her ring had stopped moving. For the first time all morning, she was completely still. Senator Ashworth's attorney rose immediately. "The board will note that the student's testimony is entirely self-reported. No independent verification?" "We have verification." Captain Daniel Reyes stepped forward from the side of the room, carrying a sealed evidence folder. The sound of his shoes on the auditorium floor was unhurried and deliberate. He set the folder on the board chairman's table and stepped back. Quote 91. Quote, the attorney said. Quote 92. Quote, Reyes said simply. Quote 93. He paused. Quote 94. Senator Ashworth's jaw tightened visibly. He leaned toward his attorney and spoke in a rapid, low voice. His attorney's expression shifted from confidence to calculation. Quote, 95, quote, the attorney began. Quote, 96, quote, the chairman said. Anand moved to the projection equipment at the side of the room. The large screen above the board's table flickered to life. The image was time-stamp coded, greenish, flat institutional light. A hallway outside an instrument storage room at 11:47 p.m. The room watched Mrs. Colton enter the storage room alone. The room watched her emerge. Then Anand advanced the footage to the reflected window, to the face in the darkened classroom above, to the small, private, satisfied smile that had no audience. Or so Colton had believed. The auditorium went cold. Not quiet. Cold. The particular atmospheric shift of 400 people understanding something simultaneously. Mrs. Colton's composure fractured for exactly 2 seconds. Her hands separated on the table. Her ring scraped the surface once, sharp and involuntary, like a branch snapping in still air. Senator Ashworth pushed back his chair and stood. Quote, 97. Quote, he turned toward the side exit. 2 figures in dark jackets were already standing at the door. One of them held a document. The nearer one said, Ashworth's voice dropped to something dangerous. You work for me. The officer looked at him without expression. Not anymore. The back doors of the auditorium opened. Everyone heard them. The heavy hinges groaned once, and the sound cut through the frozen standoff at the front of the room like a stone dropped into still water. 400 heads turned. Donovan Ashworth walked down the center aisle alone. He was not wearing his blazer. His shirt was untucked on one side, and the left lapel of his collar was torn at the seam, a small, precise damage that told its own story about what had happened before he arrived. On his jaw, just below the cheekbone, a dark bruise was blossoming the color of a storm front moving in. His father's ring. Everyone who looked at it understood immediately. Senator Ashworth stood at the blocked exit and went absolutely still. His voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Donovan did not look at him. He kept walking. His sneakers were quiet on the auditorium floor. He reached the front of the room and stopped at the microphone, and he stood there for a moment, breathing through his nose, his eyes fixed on the middle distance. Quote, 104, quote, he said. His voice was unsteady but clear. Quote, 105. Quote, the attorney shot to his feet. Quote, 106, quote, 107, quote. The voice was General Webb's, quiet, final. The attorney sat down. Donovan exhaled. Mrs. Colton unlocked the instrument storage room at 11:47 p.m. on November 4th. I know because I was in the corridor. She used her faculty master key. He paused. My father called her at 11:15 that same night. I heard the call. He said, his voice tightened briefly, then held. He said to neutralize the liability before it reached the committee. Those were his exact words, neutralize the liability. The room was a held breath. The file name on the deleted footage was HCA-CAM4-NOV04. I know because Finch told my father it existed. My father told him to make it disappear. Donovan's eyes moved to Marcus for the first time. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 112, underscore, underscore Marcus looked at him. His expression did not change, but his hand, resting on the notebook in his lap, pressed down slowly against the cover. The particular weight of someone steadying themselves against something they had already endured. Mrs. Colton rose from the respondent's table. This boy is confused and clearly under duress. Sit down, Mrs. Colton. The board chairman's voice was not unkind. It was simply done. She sat. For the first time, her ring was silent. Senator Ashworth turned back toward the blocked exit, and the officer at the door stepped forward with the document extended. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 115, underscore, underscore, underscore. The officer's voice was flat and professional. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Ashworth looked at his son across the length of the auditorium. Donovan finally looked back at him. It was not the look of a son seeking approval. It was something else entirely. Something that had taken a bruise, and a torn lapel, and a long walk down a center aisle to become. It was the look of someone who had just put something down that he had been carrying for his entire life. 6 months later, the courtroom sentencing took 11 minutes. Mrs. Harriet Colton received the judge's words without expression. Teaching license revoked, state pension redirected as restitution, 18 months in a minimum security facility. The judge called her betrayal precise and deliberate, a violation of the most fundamental trust a society extends to its educators. Colton looked at Marcus once near the end, her eyes searching his face for something. Contempt, satisfaction, anything to push against. Marcus gave her a single small nod. Not forgiveness, not cruelty, simply the acknowledgement that it was over. The nod burned her more than anything else could have, and she looked away first. Senator Richard Ashworth received federal charges on 3 counts. He walked out of the courthouse in handcuffs. Cameras recording the collapse of a carefully constructed public identity in real time. He did not look at his son. Donovan Ashworth received probation and 400 hours of community service. He walked out of the same courthouse 20 minutes later into thin winter sunlight. No blazer, no leather satchel, no father waiting at the bottom of the steps. He stood on the pavement for a moment, blinking. the cold air sharp against his face. Then he started walking. He looked lost. He looked, for the first time, free. The memorial garden sat at the edge of the Veterans District, quiet in late afternoon light. The air smelled of cut grass and old stone, and the shadows of the oak trees stretched long and soft across the path. 3 figures walked together toward a granite marker set into the ground near the east wall. Captain Elizabeth A. Webb, physician, soldier, mother. Her care was her courage. Beneath it, newly added, a smaller brass plate. The Captain Elizabeth Webb Scholarship for Musical Arts. Ashibwe, awarded annually to a student of exceptional talent and exceptional character. Marcus crouched before the marker. He pressed his fingers against the cool granite, the stone solid and permanent under his palm. His original handwritten score, recovered from evidence, restored, the pages carefully flattened, was tucked under his arm, slightly warped still from the humidity of his apartment all those months ago. "I didn't let them change me, Mom," he said quietly. "Not even a little." General Raymond Webb stood behind him, his dress uniform exchanged today for a plain dark coat. His eyes were bright in the fading light. He did not speak for a moment. "She used to say music was armor," he said finally. Marcus stood. He looked at the score in his hands, then at his father. She was right. They had the building, the title, the money. They had everything institutional. He paused. "I just had the truth. Turns out that's the only thing that doesn't get deleted." Mr. Theodore Okafor stood beside them in a modest charcoal suit, a military service medal, recovered from official archives with General Webb's help, pinned carefully to his lapel. He said nothing. He simply looked at the marker and nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who had waited a long time to stand somewhere that felt like this. 3 figures walked away together into the fading light. They left behind the marble hallways, the fluorescent hum, the portraits of men who had confused wealth with worth. What they carried forward fit inside a composition notebook and a brass plate, and the unbroken quiet between a father and his son. Mrs. Colton had called it the biggest joke she'd ever heard. A black man commanding 4 stars at the Pentagon, a scholarship boy daring to claim that inheritance. The joke, it turned out, was never about the general's rank. It was about the smallness required to mock it. Honor is not something purchased with an endowment. Dignity is not something inherited with a donor plaque. Talent does not belong to the building that tries to house it. Marcus Webb walked into Harrington Conservatory with a broken instrument case and 11 weeks of handwritten music and the memory of a mother who taught him that the note which holds is the one played with conviction, not volume. Every institution that confused money with merit, credentials with character, and cruelty with authority learned the same lesson on the same day. The truth does not need defending. It only needs witnesses. And witnesses, it turns out, have a way of arriving exactly when they are needed. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and share this video to remind someone today of their own strength. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that fights for what is right. Tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done in Marcus'